that you made it and that you're still here. Today, I'm not going to present SWIAT or the strategic area of what SWIAT is doing, etc., like we did in the last crypto asset conference, but rather focus on the aspect that financial institutions have to face right now and where they have to make a strategic decision that will determine their business model quite for a longer time period. And we noticed that these discussions always arise and always come up, and yet never everyone has a clear grasp to it. So what we wanted to do with this presentation really is to show what we believe what the strategic options are for financial institutions and where the different crossroads could lead. And since we have heard quite a lot already about different projects and what is going on in the market, and sometimes I've gotten as well a quite detailed view, for example, about the DLT pirate regime or similar, I always like to go back to the basics, right? So just to remember why we are here or why this technology is so fascinating for many of us. And the main point, the core feature of blockchain is definitely that there is no single point of failure. And I'm convinced that I'm not telling you anything new in this regard. The second element is that due to the first aspect that there is no single point of failure, that trust is moving from institutions to technology, right? Since I know that this mechanism, this technology will not fail, I know that I can trust it. Hence, I do not need an institution. So the question, or not the question, but the obviously aspect is that blockchain leads to disintermediation. And the question will be, who is about to getting disintermediated, right? And especially looking at the element that trust moves from institutions to technology, which trusting or which entity that is creating trust is about to disintermediate. And in general, we would say that all the ingredients are there for disintermediation, right? We have the technology on one side where we know this technology is working. We have seen enough proof of concepts. We know that there are live transactions. We have the Siemens transaction, for example, and many more transactions in the pipeline in the market if you're talking to some entities and actors within the market. So this space is definitely buzzing. And on the other side, and this is definitely a new, I would argue, is that we have the regulatory framework that is now supporting as well this disintermediation and is accepting or embracing as well this change. And we have the DLT pilot regime, we have MiCA on EU level, and as well in national law, especially in Germany, we have all the ingredients set, right? So we have the ingredients for technology, we know that it's working, we have the ingredients on the regulatory side, and we are getting support even more over there when we say, okay, we need something new in addition. So I would argue the calls to more regulation within this space and from the last years have been heard and are there now. And we could now use that. So before we maybe jump and say, okay, this entity is going to be disintermediated, maybe a short look to the status quo of the post-trading landscape that is going to be affected by this. What we did, we are showing here the 4 different layers of value creation in the post-trading environment, where you have ultimately the customer with the main interest of storing valuables and getting a return on his assets. You have the banks that are performing the transformational tasks, right? Some risk and term transformation. And you have the intermediaries, right, where that intermediate between the infrastructure providers and those banks. Sometimes there are no intermediaries between banks and CSDs in this regard, but in most of the cases you have some custodians, etc., intermediating and even more actors that are kind of bridging the technological gap that everyone is using its own IT systems, yeah. And then you have the CSDs that provide infrastructure, including settlement, right, and clearing features. And each of these layers are fine within their layer, right? There are clear positions, clear roles defined where to act and what to do. And nevertheless, this monopolistic value chain is quite fragmented, right? Why is it monopolistic? Because if you go down to the bottom, you will see that there are less and less and less actors. Ultimately, where trust is going to be created that something has truly settled and that something has been truly moved. And if we now look at the element of blockchain technology, that we know this kind of technology is quite proven now, and we are getting regulation that is supporting us to do some disintermediation in that space. For example, in this case, the DLT pilot regime as a representative of all this regulation. We know that the blue market environment, right, is going to get under pressure. There, the business models are going to be questioned, and the role distribution is as well open for negotiation again, because one of these actors or more of the multiples of these actors could be disintermediated in a future role. And looking at the two different options that there are, and I really like how the DLT pilot regime is framing this, and this is kind of looking at the DLT pilot regime, there are basically two different options. The first one, that retail customers get direct access to organized markets and infrastructure. And the other is that there are new options for infrastructure providers to emerge and to compete in that market. And looking at the first one, right, the potential development where retail customers get direct access to organized markets, the potential development could be that infrastructure intermediaries start offering convenience services to banks, right, to enhance their services and say, okay, we can take this over, it's okay, just a supporting function so that you have less to do, etc., etc. By that, they are building up an infrastructure with which they could later possibly attack the customer interface and challenge it, ultimately leading to an Amazon case scenario where banks diminish to auxiliary players where their transformational tasks are still required. However, their role is being assigned to them, and they're not taking over the distribution. They're not defining their position in the ecosystem. They are getting assigned to their role in the ecosystem, and that could lead to quite dominant market positions of infrastructure providers. I guess that becomes quite obvious with the picture to the left, and of course, banks would have a reduced value capture in this ecosystem, meaning downsized business models and without or with less negotiation power in the entire ecosystem. And of course, only a few monopolistic actors in the center. The other scenario would be that financial institutions like banks, right, they jointly operate a DLT network and thereby can operate financial market infrastructure within this DLT network, like a DLT trading and settlement system or a settlement system or a DLT MTF, what we all know from the DLT pilot regime. And the only change that they would actually be doing is the green element in the main activity is banks would be able to provide settlement services as well. And that only by jointly running a network from and for regulated financial entities to technically enable settlement. And what this basically does is it dramatically shortens the value chain, as we see that we only have two different layers basically where entities are acting independently. We have customers and the banks are then as well a part of that infrastructure by jointly running it, by jointly running nodes. And that will lead to an integrated value chain where I can harmonize the offering that I'm doing, offering towards my customer and on my customer interface quite well to that what I'm capable of technically doing on a blockchain. Furthermore, and I guess this is quite an important element, is that I have the liberty to decide which kind of apps and applications I want to run on the network and where I want to create new revenue streams and where I want to position my business model. In the other scenario, I'm getting assigned a certain role and I will either take it or someone else will have to take it because I am not in the dominant position anymore. And then, of course, you have quite some time and cost advantages if you have an integrated value chain over competitors that are still in the status quo or obviously that are still in the other scenario in the first case that I depicted. And we kind of comparing those three scenarios is that the status quo is not really desirable, right? All entities that are here listed in the status quo in the fragmented value chain have reason to push for a different scenario. All of them can change their role within the ecosystem and increase and better position themselves in the market to push their business model. Which means that the status quo is definitely a status that is going to be left behind, and everyone that is not making a decision to proactively push either the other scenarios will later get a role assigned and will not be able to shape its own business model. And the strategic crossroad now, from a strategy point of view, is either doing vertical forward integration, meaning that along the value chain, actors start attacking and start going to the customer interface and try to offer their own services, as we have pointed out, that's quite favored by financial infrastructure providers, right? So that they can increase their value creation share. And on the other hand, a vertical backward integration, as you would call it, where you maintain the control over the value chain as the entity that is already in the position of the customer interface, and start providing as well the services that are part of the value chain further away of the customer. And that is definitely the mechanism to shorten the value chain, get cost time advantages, etc., and which ultimately leads to the scenario that you have a co-opetition, because you jointly run the network, which creates this time and costs benefits, while you're still competing with the other banks that are helping you as well to run the network around the customers, right? Of course, the customer interface horizontally, if we would add this to this pillar, we would see that banks are competing for customers. And this remains unchanged. However, we think that a proactive bank that actually wants to shape its own business model will always push for the latter scenario. So why? Right? Why vertical backward integration? We added some details around that one as well, because you own the customer interface as a bank already. It's the easiest way to protect it by increasing and doing more in that regard. So you have the best position to start. Then flexibility and autonomy. You can decide where you want to go with your business model. You can position yourself within the ecosystem as you like. Integrated and shortened value chain is something that I have touched on already, and cost and time advantages as well. But the key element is that you maintain control over the value chain and that you actively shape how the business model should be set. And this is the point, now finally, after 15 slides, maybe or 10 slides within this presentation, where I can point out what SWIAT is actually doing and why we are here and why we have been founded, is that as SWIAT, we are a software provider who is not part of that value chain actually, but standing next to it, offering software for creating such a DLT network that banks can jointly run to offer those services and to disintermediate the value chain and shorten the value chain within their favor. And this is exactly what we're doing. So we are not running the network, etc. We are just offering the software to those institutions that they are able to run this network, that they are able to position themselves within the market. And of course, what is now required for vertical backward integration with DLT? One element is definitely scalable solutions. You have to go beyond one simple decentralized application where you say, okay, now I can tokenize, but the question is always, what do you do next? Right? You always need to have a use case to reuse it, and that's where interoperability comes into play, where you better not be on an island, but rather be in an ecosystem where you can say, my assets are going to be reused, I have a purpose for this asset, and this is not a hold to maturity, as we could hear before in the panel discussions of this morning, that this is definitely not a scenario that is favorable for anyone. And then, of course, I need the regulatory compliant software to use all that, but the green marked element, right, that is again the strategic element that comes into place where I'm not talking about technology, is you need other banks in that network to interact with so that you can jointly run this network. And I'm very glad that we can welcome as well Friederike Burkhardt from LBBW here on stage with us, who was part of the deal team to make this press announcement as well happen, so that we have new partners incoming at SWIAT actually, and that we are onboarding Standard Chartered Ventures and LBBW as new shareholders.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, among all these first-round investors, it's fair to say that we have been the most reluctant to do the investment. But we finally gave it a go, as you can see, and it's basically coming down to 3 reasons. First one being pretty obvious, we plan to use the platform. On the platform there are going to be multiple DApps. One of them, the decentralized collateral protocol, enables us to use the advantages of distributed ledger technology for collateralization and repo lending purposes. So we'll not only on-ramp our own assets, but we also have more than 150 billion of assets under custody. And we've long been wanting to provide our custody clients with agency lending services, but it has always been too complex to implement that. Now we are planning to on-ramp the eligible assets of our custody clients on the platform, and due to this disintermediation and the streamlined processes, we can provide them with an agency lending service. Also, this applies to traditional assets already, which we can on-ramp. Going further, when we have tokenized assets that are platform native, and when we have implemented the cash trigger solution to also get the payment leg onto the platform, these processes will be further streamlined and optimized, making it even easier for us to provide our clients with these services. So, now you might want to ask, why did we invest and not only use the platform? So here's reason number 2. As a startup, just being 1 year old, of course, we need to finance the developments that are going to be made to make the platform usable. So we just wanted to support that. And as we can see clear use cases for our bank, we think others will just join, and this will make our investment a good one, hopefully. And reason number 3 is just the collaboration, where already in our due diligence period, we have worked on roadmap items between our houses, and all of us have done DLT, digital assets initiatives before, separately, but now we're at a point where we can bring together not only our experiences, but also our assets onto the platform to help develop and to accelerate adoption and further development. We have one more slide, don't we?
Yeah, thanks. We do have one more slide, and thank you very much for that insight. Why LBBW has decided to join this platform and to invest into it, and the same, of course, accounts for, in a similar way, to Standard Chartered and the other partners. And of course, now, after telling you why this is important and what is actually happened or what is required for that and what is already going on and where the commitment already is, of course, this slide, our last slide, cannot be missed, of course. What are your opportunities? What can you do? And of course, joining the ecosystem, right? Joining the DLT network and using it as well for your own purposes is definitely something where we would encourage, because this co-opetition scenario where you can disintermediate, where you can shorten the value chain and yet shape it in the way that you like it to be, is something that we consider as extremely powerful. Then, furthermore, as already highlighted by Friederike, we invite everyone to participate within the transactions that we are currently having in the pipeline. We are free and open to engage in some discussions, so that when you say, okay, I'm interested into becoming an investor of a certain asset, or I would like to issue one, feel free to get in touch. And as well then maybe gain experience on how a secondary market that is blockchain based could look like, because the experience in securities lending, right, that is on-chain and is capable of settling in real time is definitely a case that is dramatically changing the way we manage liquidity and how the securities lending business could work. Thank you very much.